Tensions were boiling in the quiet suburban neighborhood as James watched in horror from his driveway. The HOA president, Margaret, was barking orders at the tow truck driver, pointing a trembling finger at his prized 1967 Mustang Fastback. "That car is an eyesore. Tow it away immediately." But little did she know, this classic car wasn't just James' most cherished possession. It had been declared a historic city treasure. The battle was just beginning. James gripped the car door handle, his knuckles turning white. "You can't do this, Margaret. That car is over 50 years old. It's a piece of history." The HOA president sneered, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "I don't care if it's the Hope Diamond. It's been sitting in your driveway for weeks, violating our community bylaws." She turned to the burly tow truck driver. "Get that piece of junk out of here. Now." "Hold on." James stepped in front of the car, shielding it with his body. "This car was gifted to me by my grandfather. It's irreplaceable." Margaret let out an exasperated sigh. "Your grandfather's junk heap is lowering our property values. You have 24 hours to move it or we'll impound it." James felt a lump in his throat. "But where am I supposed to put it? I don't have another garage." "Not my problem." Margaret flashed a triumphant grin. "Time's ticking, James." With that, she strutted back to her mansion, leaving the tow truck driver and a devastated James in her wake. Clutching the car's smooth burgundy fender, James let out a shaky breath. This wasn't just any vehicle. It was a cherished family heirloom, a link to his grandfather's legacy. He couldn't let Margaret destroy it. But what could he do? Determined, James hurried inside and started making frantic phone calls. If the HOA wouldn't listen to reason, he'd have to find someone who would. After hours of searching, he finally got through to the city's Historic Preservation Office. "You've got to help me," he pleaded. "The HOA is threatening to tow my '67 Mustang Fastback, but it was declared a historic treasure last year." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Hold on, let me check our records." The woman's voice suddenly perked up. "Wait, you're right. That car is protected under our city's historic vehicle ordinance. The HOA can't touch it." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank goodness. So what do I do?" "I'll send an official letter to the HOA right away, informing them that the car is off limits. In the meantime, I'd suggest parking it somewhere secure, just to be safe." Nodding, James glanced out the window at his beloved Mustang. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'm not going to let them take you away." The next morning, James carefully maneuvered the Mustang into his neighbor's detached garage, praying the HOA wouldn't spot it. As he stepped back to admire the gleaming classic car, he couldn't help but smile. His grandfather would be proud. Just then, the sound of heels clicking against the pavement made James' heart drop. He turned to see Margaret storming towards him, her face twisted in fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, jabbing an accusatory finger at the garage. James stood his ground. "Protecting my property, like you asked. The car is now in secure storage until this gets resolved." Margaret let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, I don't think so. That eyesore is still on our community property. It has to go, one way or another." "But I spoke to the Historic Preservation Office," James argued. "They said the car is protected. You can't touch it." "We'll see about that." Margaret's eyes narrowed menacingly. "I have my ways of dealing with troublemakers like you, James. This isn't over." With that, she whirled around and stormed off, leaving James with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He knew Margaret wouldn't give up that easily. She was determined to get rid of the Mustang, no matter what. Later that day, James received a troubling call from his neighbor. "Hey man, just wanted to let you know the Historic Preservation Office called. They said the HOA is challenging the designation on your car." James felt his blood run cold. "What? How is that possible?" I don't know, but they're pulling out all the stops. Apparently, Margaret has some friends in high places. Panic began to set in. If the HOA managed to revoke the historic status, there would be nothing stopping them from impounding the car. James needed to act fast. Jumping into his truck, he raced down to City Hall, determined to get to the bottom of this. As he burst through the doors of the Historic Preservation Office, a stern-looking woman approached him. "Mr. Everett, I presume," she said, her expression grave. "We need to talk." The woman ushered James into a small conference room, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'm afraid we have a serious problem," she began, her tone somber. James gripped the edge of the table, his heart pounding. "What's going on? I thought my car was protected." It was, until the HOA filed an appeal. The woman shook her head. They pulled some strings and managed to get a hearing scheduled for next week. A hearing? James felt his stomach drop. But why? The car was already declared a historic treasure. The HOA is claiming the designation was made in error, and that your Mustang doesn't actually meet the criteria. The woman sighed heavily. They've hired a high-priced lawyer to argue their case. James ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. This is unbelievable. Margaret has never liked the car, but I never thought she'd go this far. "I'm afraid she's determined to get rid of it," the woman said. "And with the resources she has at her disposal, I'm worried the historic status may be revoked." Panic began to set in. If the HOA succeeded, James would have no legal recourse to stop them from impounding the car. His beloved Mustang, the last tangible connection to his grandfather, would be lost forever. "There has to be something we can do," he pleaded. "I can't just sit back and watch them take it away." The woman's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand how important this car is to you, but the hearing is just a week away, and the odds are stacked against us. Unless we can find a way to bolster the case for the Mustang's historic significance, I'm afraid the outcome may not be in our favor." James felt a growing sense of dread. He couldn't let Margaret win, not after everything his grandfather had gone through to restore that car. Steeling his resolve, he looked the woman straight in the eye. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to dig up every bit of evidence I can to prove this car is a true historic treasure, and I'm going to need your help to do it." The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Everett, let's get to work." Over the next few days, James immersed himself in research, scouring old newspaper clippings, car magazines, and family archives for any shred of evidence that could bolster the case for his beloved Mustang. Meanwhile, the woman from the Historic Preservation Office, whose name was revealed to be Sarah, worked tirelessly to prepare their legal strategy. "Okay, let's go over what we got so far," Sarah said, her brow furrowed in concentration as they pored over the stack of documents spread out on the conference room table. James pointed to a faded newspaper article. "This one details how my grandfather, Henry, painstakingly restored the car back in the 1970s. It was his pride and joy." Sarah nodded, jotting down a note. "That's good. Establishing the car's provenance and connection to your family will be key." James then pulled out a yellowed car magazine. And here, the Mustang is featured in a special collector's edition, highlighting its rarity and historical significance. "Excellent." Sarah's eyes lit up. "We can use that to demonstrate the car's cultural value and why it deserves protected status." As they continued to sift through the materials, James couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance of saving his grandfather's beloved Mustang. Just then, the conference room door burst open, and a flustered-looking intern rushed in. "Ms. Walters, you need to see this," she panted, handing Sarah a sheaf of papers. Sarah quickly scanned the documents, her expression darkening. "Oh no." "What is it?" James asked, his heart sinking. "The HOA has filed a motion to have the historic designation revoked, citing a technicality in the original application process. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with concern. If this goes through, the Mustang will lose its protected status. James felt his stomach twist into knots. But that's impossible. We did everything by the book. I know, but the HOA's lawyers seem to have found a loophole. Sarah's brow furrowed. And with their connections, they may just succeed in getting the designation overturned. Panic began to set in as James realized the gravity of the situation. If the HOA won, his grandfather's beloved Mustang would be vulnerable to their wrath. He couldn't let that happen. Not after all the time and effort he put into preserving this piece of his family's history. Steeling his resolve, James leaned forward, determination burning in his eyes. Then we'll just have to find a way to close that loophole. I won't let them take this car away from me. Sarah nodded, a newfound sense of urgency in her voice. All right, let's get back to work. We've got a hearing to win. The day of the hearing dawned, and James could barely contain his nerves as he and Sarah entered the courtroom. The HOA's high-powered legal team was already seated, their faces set in smug expressions. As the judge called the proceedings to order, James felt a lump form in his throat. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of his beloved Mustang. Sarah stood and addressed the court, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, we are here today to defend the historic designation of Mr. Everett's 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. This vehicle is a treasured piece of our city's automotive heritage, and we have ample evidence to support its protected status. The HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, rose to his feet. With all due respect, Your Honor, the designation was made in error. Our client's research has uncovered a critical flaw in the original application process. James watched in dismay as the attorney laid out his case, citing obscure regulations and technicalities. Sarah, however, remained calm and composed, methodically refuting each of his arguments. As the hearing wore on, James could feel the tension in the room building. The HOA's attorney was relentless, but Sarah's knowledge of the law and her passion for preserving the Mustang's legacy shone through. Finally, the judge held up a hand, silencing the two sides. I've heard enough. This is a complex issue, and I will need time to carefully review the evidence before rendering a decision. James felt his heart sink. Time was not on their side. The HOA could use this delay to their advantage. As the courtroom began to empty, he pulled Sarah aside, his voice laced with worry. What if we don't win? What if they take the car away? Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We gave it our best effort, James. The evidence is on our side, and the judge seemed to be listening. All we can do now is wait and see. Nodding reluctantly, James watched as the HOA's attorney strode out of the courtroom, a confident smirk on his face. The battle lines had been drawn, and the fate of the Mustang hung in the balance. As James made his way back to his car, his mind raced with worry. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his grandfather's legacy. He had to find a way to tip the scales in their favor, even if it meant taking drastic measures. The waiting was excruciating. For the next 2 weeks, James found himself constantly on edge, checking his phone for any updates from Sarah. The suspense was overwhelming, and he found it increasingly difficult to focus on his day-to-day life. One evening, as he was tinkering with the Mustang's engine in his neighbor's garage, his phone finally lit up with a call from Sarah. James, I have some news, she said, her voice tense. James felt his heart skip a beat. What is it? Did the judge make a decision? Yes, and I'm afraid it's not good. Sarah let out a heavy sigh. The judge has ruled in favor of the HOA. He's ordered the historic designation to be revoked. James felt the blood drain from his face. No, that can't be. We had so much evidence. I know. I'm so sorry. Sarah's voice was laced with sympathy. The judge said the HOA's lawyers were able to demonstrate a procedural flaw in the original application. There's nothing more we can do through legal channels. James gripped the edge of the workbench, his knuckles turning white. This is unbelievable. Margaret and her cronies can't just take my grandfather's car away. I wish there was more I could do, James. Sarah's tone was somber. But the ruling is final. The Mustang will lose its protected status in 48 hours. Panic began to set in as James realized the gravity of the situation. He had to act fast, before the HOA could swoop in and seize the car. But what could he possibly do? Suddenly, an idea started to form in his mind. A risky, desperate plan that might just work. Thanking Sarah for the update, he quickly ended the call and began to put his plan into motion. Over the next 2 days, James worked tirelessly, gathering supplies and making the necessary preparations. He knew this was a long shot, but he had to try. The Mustang was more than just a car. It was a piece of his family's history, a legacy that he refused to let the HOA steal away. As the deadline approached, James made his way to the garage, his heart pounding. This was it, his last chance to save the car. Taking a deep breath, he climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and James steeled himself for what was to come. The Mustang's tires squealed as James peeled out of the garage, the iconic engine thundering with power. He had no time to waste. The clock was ticking, and the HOA could descend at any moment. As he navigated the winding streets, James' mind raced. He knew this plan was risky, but he had no other choice. The Mustang was his last link to his grandfather, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing it. Suddenly, James caught a glimpse of the familiar black SUV in his rearview mirror. It was Margaret, and she was closing in fast. James gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. "Not today, Margaret," he muttered through gritted teeth, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The Mustang surged forward, weaving through traffic with the agility of a sports car. James could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he expertly navigated the city streets, staying one step ahead of the HOA president. But Margaret was relentless, and before long, she had called in backup. 2 more black SUVs appeared, their drivers determined to catch James and his beloved Mustang. Glancing in the rearview mirror, James spotted the flashing lights of a police cruiser. His heart sank. Had the HOA managed to involve the authorities as well? Suddenly, an idea struck him. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he made a sharp turn down a narrow alley, the Mustang's tires squealing in protest. The police car followed, but the HOA's SUVs were too large to navigate the tight space. "Yes," James shouted, a grin spreading across his face. He was losing them, at least for now. As he emerged onto a bustling main street, James knew he had to think fast. The police were still on his tail, and he couldn't outrun them forever. But then he spotted a familiar landmark up ahead, the steps of City Hall. Without hesitation, James floored the accelerator, the Mustang's engine roaring as he raced towards the historic building. As he pulled up in front of the entrance, he could see a crowd of bystanders gathering, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Jumping out of the car, James sprinted up the steps, waving his arms frantically. "Stop. You can't impound this car. It's a historic treasure." The police officer who had been chasing him caught up, his hand resting on his holster. "Sir, you need to step away from the vehicle. You're under arrest." But just then, a familiar voice rang out from the crowd. "Hold on, officer. That car is protected by the city's Historic Preservation Ordinance." It was Sarah, her eyes shining with determination. "This is the very Mustang we've been fighting to save. You can't touch it." The officer hesitated, his gaze shifting between James, the Mustang, and Sarah. Slowly, he lowered his hand, a look of uncertainty crossing his face. As the crowd erupted into cheers, James felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had found a way to save his grandfather's legacy, against all odds. But as he turned to face the Mustang, he couldn't help but wonder what new challenges might lie ahead. The battle with the HOA was far from over, and he knew he would have to be vigilant if he wanted to keep his cherished car safe. In the aftermath of the dramatic showdown at City Hall, James found himself in a tenuous position. While the Historic Preservation Office had managed to temporarily halt the impound order, the battle with the HOA was far from over. Margaret and her team of lawyers were furious, and they wasted no time in escalating the conflict. They filed a series of appeals, challenging the historic designation at every turn, and even went so far as to threaten legal action against the city for overstepping its bounds. James, ever the determined defender of his grandfather's legacy, refused to back down. He worked tirelessly alongside Sarah, gathering more evidence and building an airtight case to solidify the Mustang's protected status. The weeks turned into months as the legal wrangling dragged on, but James never lost hope. He knew that his grandfather would have fought tooth and nail to keep the car safe, and he was damned if he was going to let the HOA take it away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge presiding over the case delivered his ruling. With a solemn nod, he declared that the historic designation would stand, effectively shutting down the HOA's attempts to impound the Mustang. As the news spread, the community erupted in celebration. Neighbors who had once been indifferent to James' beloved car now rallied around him, praising his determination and the city's commitment to preserving its automotive heritage. Margaret, her face twisted in a scowl, stormed out of the courtroom, her expensive heels clicking furiously against the marble floors. James couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as he watched her retreat, knowing that he had won this battle, and more importantly, that his grandfather's legacy would live on. As he stood before the gleaming Mustang, James felt a surge of pride and nostalgia. This car wasn't just a possession. It was a part of his family's history, a tangible connection to the grandfather he had adored. And thanks to his unwavering determination, it would remain a cherished treasure for generations to come. With a contented smile, James slid behind the wheel, the familiar rumble of the engine sending a thrill through his body. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he couldn't help but glance back at the stately City Hall, a silent nod of gratitude to the Historic Preservation Office and all those who had fought alongside him. The road ahead may be uncertain, but one thing was clear. James Everett and his grandfather's beloved Mustang Fastback were here to stay.